if we have the rate of outgassing that was like what we saw before, it might take 2,000 years before the H2S is at a concentration where it directly poisons everyone on Earth. That sounds good. However, I think like 10% of that everybody's blind and other things happen. The first thing that happens is the H2S interacts with the atmosphere to produce a lot of compounds of sulfur, like you get sulfuric acid killing your trees. And this has happened in the past history of Earth. They talk about this Permian-Triassic time, and it's like a muddy Earth where very few species survived. And it was just covered with mud because the acid rain killed all the trees. And the chemicals go up to the ozone layer, and the thing that kills you first is when the ozone layer is depleted enough, you get radiation. And the radiation is what kills you first. But there's some amusing things that happen. Actually, the very first thing that happens is the whole world starts to smell like a sewer. Because remember, our nose is very sensitive. It may be just 1 or 2 years into this, the whole world smells like a sewer. And what this does to the biology is kind of interesting, because many species will not reproduce when it smells like a sewer. In fact, there are some humans who probably wouldn't engage in reproductive behavior if it smelled like a sewer. I mean, it would kind of inhibit them. So you would immediately get this selection effect where people who are attracted to living in the sewer, those are the ones who would reproduce. I mean, you get all kind of weird stuff happening, but a lot of species in nature are not as adaptable as humans. So the initial effect would be this awful, terrible smell, and you get the acid rain, and you get the ozone, and then at a certain point you get blindness. There are other things that H2S does as the concentration increases. Anybody could look at Wikipedia, hydrogen sulfide, H2S, and you can see the ladder of all the interesting things that happen to you before you just totally drop dead. And you know, when you're blind, you might not, if half the world is blind, that might cause a few fatalities here and there as well. So, and not to mention our food supply, a whole lot of things happen. And I just hope we don't have to experience it. Sorry, acid rain could be really bad with H2S. Acid ocean is not as bad as people say. I remember when I was inspector's office, we got a report from the Congressional Research Service. And it says the acidity of the ocean today is a pH of 8.0. Freshwater is 7.0. We're afraid in the worst case scenario, the pH might decrease to as low as 7.7 in the ocean. Well, freshwater is 7 already, okay? So some species are not very adaptable, and they would have problems. And coral has special problems people are just beginning to get their hands around. But fundamentally, life does not end at pH 7.0, let alone 7.7. So yes, there are local consequences with acid ocean, just like with sea level. Local consequences could be worth many billions of dollars and many people having to move, you know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really destroy life as we know it. It just forces a few migrations and wars and little things like that. But the pH is not nearly as life-threatening as this H2S possibility. We need to do research to know more precisely how close we are to the end and what the drivers are. And I've mentioned some of that research that really should be urgent. It's not that expensive. But secondly, of course, we need to work on the greenhouse gas stuff. And that is something we studied a lot in Inspector's office. It amazes me how inefficient all of these climate change plans are that I've seen. When Obama was running for the presidency, he promised a very simple climate change bill. And then when he got into the presidency, he listened to his friend Harry Reid, who said, no, we got a deal, you got to stick with the deal. And that deal was a total mess. It would have cost $500 billion a year in special allowances to special friends, reducing U.S. greenhouse gases by 40%. I do not advocate that. But there was a bill by Cantwell, which was close to what Obama proposed. It was more like a simple fee. You pollute, you pay. You just pay a simple fee. And you also give a rebate to people who put carbon back in the soil. And that's very important too. So the bottom line is, we do need a rational, simple law that puts a price on greenhouse gas emission, but also gives money back to farmers and other people who put carbon back in the soil when they follow good new practices. That's one thing. We certainly need to be encouraging renewables in many ways. The biggest problem with greenhouse gases, it's not really the price of carbon. It's what I would call market failure. Do you know what the #1 obstacle is to more use of solar power in the U.S.? Turns out to be government regulation. There's an agency called FERC, which can approve interstate, interregional gas pipelines. Doesn't have permission to approve interstate electricity. There was a guy from Texas called Pickens. He said, this is crazy. I'm a businessman. I can make money generating solar power or wind in Texas, selling it to the East Coast. It's a bonanza for them. It's jobs for Texas. It's great. My colleagues can build a gas pipeline. Why can't I build a wire? So he went to Reid, and Reid said, yeah, we'll introduce a bill. We're going to have a level playing field. We're going to have fair market competition, so you're allowed to use solar power, and you're allowed to sell it in the East Coast. They wouldn't let him pass that bill. So we have a regulatory system now that lets you cut the corners if you're doing natural gas, but if you're trying to build electricity, you're not allowed to. The FERC is not allowed to approve it. If you go to each little township government, you can do it, but that's not real. With a gas pipeline, you can get approval, but right now we need to change the regulations. I've spoken to Republicans and Democrats about this. But a lot of the Republicans say we can't cross our friends in the oil industry. They don't want competition. And a lot of Democrats say, if you do this, Trump is going to look good, and we don't want Trump to look good. So I can't find many people willing to talk about this. It's kind of sad because our country needs it and our species needs it. And somehow we got to cut through all this partisan nonsense. So bottom line is, yeah, we need to encourage renewables. We need research on renewables. We also need research on geoengineering technology to let us survive in the worst case if the rest doesn't work. Can we find a way to cool down just the Antarctic? You know, can we do that to keep the oxygen coming? So there are a lot of things we need to do, and our life is at stake, so we really ought to be doing all of these things.